Of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived, but the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And thus begins Jacob's story. I want to talk with you this morning about Jacob, the heel catcher. I've just read to you the account of the birth of Jacob and Esau. And that record tells us that Esau and Jacob were the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. They were twins. And they were born after Isaac and Rebekah had waited and prayed and waited and prayed for children. And I think there's a lesson there for us, and that is that children in a home are a special mark of divine favor. May I remind you what the psalmist tells us in Psalm 127, beginning in the first verse. "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate." Well, we don't have very many mothers in this assembly this morning with small children. We have Holly. And so I'll speak to Holly. And I'll tell you, Holly, when you've had a bad day, when everything has gone wrong, when your kids have gotten on your last nerve. Does that ever happen at your house? She's nodding this way. You need to remember what the psalmist says. about children. You need to remember how desperately Isaac and Rebekah wanted children. You need to remember how they prayed and waited and prayed and waited some more. Children in the home are a special mark of divine favor. I see another lesson in this part of Jacob's story, and that is that God answers prayer in His time. We have noted on other occasions that it took God 25 years to begin to commence to get started in fulfilling the promise that He made to Abraham. Abraham was 75 years old when God promised that He would make of him a great nation, and Isaac was not born for another 25 years. But please note here that Isaac and Rebekah waited 20 years for children. We need to realize that God's delays are not necessarily denials. When we pray and we pray and we pray, and it appears to us as if our petitions have fallen on deaf ears, we need to remember that God answers prayer in His time. God doesn't always work on our timetable. Sister Valley Gallup, down in Columbus, Mississippi, said that she prayed for her husband for 41 years that he would obey the gospel and become a Christian. And finally, after 41 years, it happened. I love the hymn that we sing entitled "In His Time." And the first verse of that hymn says, in His time, in His time. He makes all things beautiful in His time. Lord, please show me every day as You're teaching me Your way that You do just what You say in Your time. Well, Rebekah had difficulties in her pregnancy. And in the text that I shared with you just a few moments ago, we are told that the two children in her womb struggled within her. And Rebekah responded, if all is well, why am I this way? And so she inquired of the Lord, and the Lord explained to her that two nations were in her womb. Meaning, obviously, that her two sons would become the fathers of two nations. And for a large part of their history, these nations would be at enmity with one another. May I suggest to you that the struggle of her two sons in her womb was a foreshadowing, it seems to me, of the animosity that would exist between Israel and the Edomites later on. She names her firstborn son Esau, and she named her second son Jacob, which means supplanter or deceitful. Literally, in the Hebrew, it means one who takes by the heel. Thus, the title of my lesson this morning, Jacob, the heel catcher. Well, those two boys grow up, and they are just as different from one another as night and day. Esau was a hairy man. Jacob was not. Esau was a rugged outdoorsman. Jacob was a mild-mannered dweller in tents. And as you know, each boy was favored by one of his parents. Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob because he went for that rugged outdoorsman kind of a guy. He loved to eat his game. Rebekah loved Jacob more than Esau. And in the process of time, we read in verse 29 that Jacob cooked a stew. Esau came in from the field. He's weary. And he says to his brother, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." And Jacob responded, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I am about to die, so what profit shall this birthright be to me?" Jacob says, "Swear to me as of this day." And so Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. Well, we talked about that part of the story a good bit in our study together last week, as I tried to help you focus on Esau, a profane person. And last week I mentioned the fact that there were several things associated with the birthright. There was a certain dignity that the firstborn son enjoyed. There was certain sovereignty. He was the one who received a double portion of the inheritance, and he was the one that normally received the paternal blessing. And of course, that will have a part to play in our story as we turn in our Bibles to the 27th chapter of Genesis. Jacob's story picks up again in this chapter when Isaac is an old man. He's old and he's blind or almost blind. And on one occasion, he instructed his oldest son Esau, verse 2, "Behold now, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, and that my soul may bless you before I die." And the record tells us that Isaac's wife Rebekah was listening in, hearing all of this. And as you know, when Esau left to follow his father's instructions, Rebekah concocts a plan to deceive her husband so that he'll give Jacob the blessing instead of Esau. And so she tells Jacob to go and kill 2 kids of the goats so that she can make savory food, the kind of food that Isaac loved. And she instructs Jacob to take that in to his father so that he will give him the blessing. Well, Jacob is concerned because his brother is a hairy man and he is not. And he says in verse 11, "Look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man. I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing." And Rebekah replies, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And so he follows his mother's instructions. She put some of the goat skins on Jacob's arms and around his neck. Esau must have been a very hairy man. She made the savory food, gave Jacob bread, and he goes in to Isaac. Remember, Isaac's old. He's blind or almost blind. And he says to Isaac, "My father, here I am." And Isaac says, "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob says, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." And Isaac asked him, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" And Jacob says, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." And then Isaac says to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." And Jacob does that. And Isaac says the voice is Jacob's voice. But the hands are the hands of Esau. And Isaac asked Jacob once again, "Are you really my son, Esau?" And he said, "I am." And so he instructs who he thinks is Esau to bring the game near, and he eats and he drinks. And he says, come near now and kiss me, my son." And he did, and Isaac kissed him, and he smelled of him, and it was the smell of one of the field. And Isaac pronounces a blessing on Jacob. You're familiar with the story. You know that about the time that Jacob leaves his father, his older brother Esau comes in. And he says to his father, verse 31, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me." And Isaac says, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." And Isaac trembles exceedingly. And then he asks, where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. And Esau cries out with a bitter cry, and he says to Isaac, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And Isaac says to Esau, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." And then Esau replies, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing. Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" And Isaac replies, "Indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son?" And Esau says, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." and Esau weeps. And Isaac pronounces a blessing of sorts on Esau. Well, I think there are some important lessons that we can learn from this part of Jacob's story. And one of the things that I see that is readily evident in this story is that one lie often leads to others. Remember that old Lay's potato chip commercial, you can't eat just one? Well, let me tell you, folks, you can't tell just one lie. Because you see, when you tell one lie, you're going to have to wind up telling other lies to prop that first lie up. Look at all of the lies that Jacob tells in this story. Lie number 1, he says, I am Esau, your firstborn. Lie number 2, I have done just as you told me. Tain't so. Lie number 3, please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. Well, he hadn't prepared wild game for his father. His mother had prepared goat meat. Lie number 4, after Isaac asked, how did you get back here so quickly? Jacob says, because the Lord your God brought it to me. What impudence! What gall! Lie number 5, when Isaac asks him, are you my son Esau? He said, I am. I think the 18th century Scottish historian Sir Walter Scott was correct when he said, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. But then there's another lesson that I see in this part of the story, and that is that things aren't always as they appear to be. The ancient writer Epictetus said long, long ago, appearances to the mind are of 4 kinds. Things either are what they appear to be, or they neither are nor appear to be, or they are and do not appear to be, or they are not and yet appear to be. Rightly to aim in all these cases is the wise man's task. When I was just a young lad, listening to my father preach from time to time, I remember him quoting, my mother is nodding her head yes, I remember my dad quoting this statement from Epictetus. In his play, The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare said, all that glisters is not gold. That little adage has been changed, has it not, down through the years? All that glitters is the more popular form. All that glitters is not gold. Sometimes things can be like a dead mackerel in the moonlight. It shines, but it still stinks. Kathy's shaking her head. She never knows what I'm going to say. Keeps things exciting. She is inwardly groaning. She did say for better or worse. Now there's a couple of extremes that I think we need to avoid when we realize that things aren't always as they appear to be. One extreme is suspicion. We shouldn't be looking for the boogeyman behind every bush. But there's another extreme, and that is the extreme of gullibility, just believing anything and everything. Brother, when something doesn't pass the smell test, when the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau, we need to take a closer look. We need to remember that things aren't always as they appear to be. We need to trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan said. May I point out to you that in this particular story, there is family failure on the part of every character involved. Isaac knew about what God had told Rebekah just before she gave birth. God had said that there were two nations in her womb and that the older would serve the younger. Isaac knew that. And Rebekah knew that. And Jacob, in going along with his mother's scheme, was certainly guilty. Nothing can be said to justify those actions. But I see another lesson here. It's a lesson that I've mentioned on other occasions, but I'll mention it quickly in passing, and that is that parental favoritism will divide a home. It brought tragedy to Isaac's family. It certainly was a barrier between Isaac and Rebekah. It created animosity between Esau and Jacob. It led to a 20-year exile for Jacob that he was ill-prepared for. It will bring tragedy to our families today. And parents sometimes show favoritism to their children for a wide variety of reasons. Maybe a father favors one child because he wanted a son rather than a daughter. Partiality may be shown because one child is better looking than the other or has more talents than others. It is not that uncommon for parents to try to live vicariously through their children. But we need to be aware of the danger of partiality in our homes. How can we keep that from happening? Well, the first thing that I would say is we need to be aware that it can happen. And we need to learn from Isaac and Rebekah's mistake. This might very well be something that mothers and fathers ought to talk about among themselves. And parents certainly need to do everything that they can to communicate their love for their children in an equal fashion. Well, after Jacob tricked Esau, Esau plots to kill his brother. He's just waiting till his father dies to carry out his plan. And the plan is revealed to Rebekah, and Rebekah sends Jacob away. But she says to Isaac in verse 46, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, like these who are the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? And so the next chapter reveals that Isaac instructs Jacob to return to Padan Aram to seek a wife. But I see a lesson here. Rebekah will never see her son again. Unintended consequences can be devastating. We really do need to look down the road. And try to anticipate where things might lead. I think our conservative liberal brethren, and by that I mean those who have not gone so far out in left field as the progressives, I think they have lived to see the fruit of unintended consequences. A stove and a refrigerator in a basement classroom has now led to fellowship halls and family life centers and gymnasiums. And brethren, our progressive brethren are now telling us that baptism is not essential to salvation, and we can use instruments of music in our worship, and we can have women preachers. Unintended consequences can be devastating. Well, we must pause, and we'll continue our look at Jacob's life, Lord willing, next Sunday morning. Thank you.